I am Amanda Tainter. I am faculty coordinator of instructional design and outcomes at Reedley College, and I'll let my co-presenter introduce herself.
I'm Julie Kehoe. I am a math instructor at Reedley College.
And Julie and I like to present very interactively, so please, we have a nice number in here, 18. So if you want to raise your hand and unmute, we'd love to have you verbally engage, or Julie is our chat master, so she will very talentedly manage the chat and speak at the same time. It is one of the many skills I greatly appreciate about Julie. And if you don't know where Reedley College is, we are in the beautiful Central Valley of California. We are a medium-sized California community college in a very rural area of the Central Valley.
We want to kind of just start out today to do a little bit of self-reflection about why you chose to come to this breakout session, and how you feel about your current grading and assessment in your courses. So if you want to unmute or throw something in the chat, we'd love to hear about what brought you here today and how you feel about your current grading system.
And we promise we won't stare awkwardly at too long. But we do want you to at least think about it. Go ahead.
I could start.
Okay, absolutely.
You guys want? Yeah, I chose this session because it wanted to see what other people are doing, but raising barriers to student success. And what put me on this path, I've been teaching college for a good amount, 15 years or so. And I started off with thinking, how can I get to reach my students that sit and hide from me in the back of the row, right in the back of the classroom. And those are usually the ones that don't come up and talk to me, slink in and out and things like that. And all the feedback I give on the exams, I see them just shoving the exam in their back pocket. Whereas my A students will go through all the feedback I've given them and come and talk to me about it and things like that. So that's what set me off on this journey. And I've actually changed how I teach completely now. And I use alternative assessments and come up with this whole methodology that I've worked out, and it's working really well. And it incorporates flipped classroom. So I don't know, I think I'm onto something.
I also am doing the flip classroom for my in-person classes, but a lot of what we're talking about today can apply to an online class or a flipped class or even a hybrid class.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else wanted to share? I see a little bit in the chat.
Yep, exactly. Paul, one of the things that Julie and I have really enjoyed is being in the Central Valley of California. We do have a very diverse set of learners that come into our campus. We are a Hispanic serving institution, so 82% of our students are Latinx students, and a high percentage of first generation. Yep, and new technologies can also be something to consider when looking at our assessment. Okay.
So we wanted to start out with, we asked you how you feel about your grading system, and this is kind of where the journey started for us, is we were unhappy with how the traditional grading and assessments that we were doing. Everything was really focused on point earning. Students would give up, they would be discouraged or fall so far behind that they would give up easily. Grades didn't reflect what students had learned. I could do an outcome assessment and look at the grades and they were completely off from each other. And enforcement of rules really just got in the way of building good relationships with our students. I hate being the taskmaster, and so these were all things that just kind of really bothered me about the traditional grading system that we were using.
And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to start with each of you reflecting on what the issues you had with your assessment, because as Julie and I engage in more and more of these conversations, it seems to really resonate when we talk about what we became frustrated with in our learning. So many nodding heads and so many yes, yes, yes. And so we hope that at least one of these bullet points is resonating with you. And if it doesn't now, then hopefully by the end of the presentation, you will realize, yes, I was frustrated with those things.
So on our journey of trying to find a better way of doing this, we came up with basically a motto or a guiding principle that helped us decide how we should be forming our grading policies and creating our assessments for our course. And that came down to, well, students who learn the material should pass the class. And I shouldn't be creating any barriers in my grading system that prevents that from happening, or passes students that didn't learn the material.
And this phrase seems so simple, and yet so many of the things that we do, at least that I was doing in my class, didn't align with this. And so just for a second, just repeat that to yourself. Students who learn the material should pass, and really be introspective here. And we love challenging people. Julie and I love to do that on campus, and we do it lovingly and with respect, but really think about it. Can you say with truthfulness, is this what's happening in your class? If your students know the material that they're passing, and vice versa too, because often I know I was guilty of the reverse, where students who were passing, but I couldn't say confidently that they actually knew the material. And I teach in child development. And so, I mean, every discipline is important, but I mean, child development is really important. And so I really wanted to make sure that they knew it. Julie's laughing because she knows I'm joking, kind of.
We really kind of use this as our yardstick for everything that we do. And it can be, I mean, it's a journey that we went on to really, really challenge what we've been doing for so long. And so the things that we got from this, the guiding principles that came from that one motto there is we should be using OER resources that to give equal access to the content for all of our students. Our grades need to be accurate. So no fluff, no extra credit and things like that are getting in the way of accurately assessing what our students learned, and getting away from compliance, is using grades as a way of getting students to comply with and do the things that we want them to do.
Yeah, and this is where we really are pushing back on students don't do optional. I mean, so often we hear that, and so we use points as a way to try and navigate students in a way that we want them to go, and that's not what we wanted to do anymore. And so we really wanted to look at the policies that we implemented in our classrooms, and that the consequences, and maybe we should change consequences isn't really the word we wanted, but the implications for what happened in our classes were natural and not arbitrary, that they did resemble what happened in quote unquote the real world, and we'll talk about the real world at the end, but that they weren't just imposed by will because we were the instructor and we thought this looks like a good due date. They had meaning. There was a reason for them. And clear communication is incredibly important. We both talk a lot about equity-based assessment, and communication and transparency in what our expectations are and the standards that we have is imperative. I mean, it's not just important, it is truly imperative to create assessments that are equitable for all of our students. And then opportunities for redemption, and we'll dive a lot more deeply into this one especially, but opportunities to practice skills and getting rid of the terms formative and summative assessments, because we're all just assessing learning, and so we don't need those terms in there anymore. We're allowing them to practice those skills in a way that makes sense to them.
So the first and maybe the hardest part of this was deciding what not to grade anymore and to use to calculate a student's final grade. Remember, we're all about finding an accurate grade at the end of the day of what students actually learned. And so we stopped grading homework. Homework is a time to make mistakes and to practice and learn. And so we wanted to get away from grading every little thing that they did. So they're not being judged at every little thing.
And if you want to,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, and if you want to equate that, one of the analogies used in a book that Julie and I really based a lot of the changes that we made off of, and that's oh, I'm going to get the name wrong, Julie. Equity in Grading by Joe Feldman.
I'll put in the chat. Joe Feldman.
Thank you. Yeah, equity in grading. And so when we think about any endeavor that we do, whether it be an athletic endeavor or chess, we have all of these opportunities to practice, to get better at the skills before that game day, before our final project. And within the context of that practice, we don't have somebody sitting there and saying, you failed, go back to the beginning. You failed, go back to the beginning. And yet that's what we do in an academic context. Whether you're giving math homework, and I'm picking on Julie because she's the math instructor, and saying, all right, you didn't practice right, so guess what? You can't pass the class now. When we constantly say in our class, I want to support learning, I want to support you getting to where you need to be, but everything that we set up for them to practice those skills that we say are so important are penalized all along the way. And so that was a huge thing, is getting rid of penalizing that practice and putting it on students to do that practice. And I know you're going to say, but if we don't give them, if we don't put points to it, they're not going to do it. And we'll talk about that as we look at how the courses is actually set up. And not grading participation and effort points. And this is something that is so important if we are going to create a classroom that is not equal, but equitable. Students participate in a way that is meaningful to them. And for us to say and subjectively define what participation looks like is really putting our own value and our own culture and our own experiences on what is considered to be participation versus what is participation according to a student's own lived experiences. And valuing what is considered to be effort is not looking at what a student's life might be outside of class. Those students that are able to participate in all of the extra things that we offer and able to engage in ways that we dictate is what a serious learner would do, is not acknowledging the fact that some of our students are working multiple jobs, taking care of siblings, taking care of family members, and they only have the means to work on that content that really is towards a skill mastery.
And this also gets in the way of an accurate grade, right? A student participating isn't necessarily learning, and a student not participating is not necessarily not learning. So really, we don't want to include things like this in a grade because it is not telling me what a student has actually learned at the end of the day. And late penalties is the same. If I start taking off points for not meeting a deadline, well, that's not telling me whether the student learned, that's telling me that they didn't comply with my imposed schedule. And so really having a flexible, I still have due dates for things, but you can do any of the assignments beyond those, and there's no penalty for doing it beyond those. So I have a schedule to help keep them on track, but they're not going to be penalized for being unable or for needing more time to, say, learn a particular topic or to find time in their work schedule to complete an assessment that I've given them.
Yep. And when we impose those late penalties, if we're looking at the guiding principles of our course to being that our grades accurately reflect what student knows, what a student knows, then those late penalties are taking away from those figures. If a student does accurately submit the assessment and say, yeah, I know this skill, but they've lost 50% of the points because they are 1 day late, then their grade is not accurately representing the content that they know. It is more accurately representing the life that they currently live. So if they have, again, working 2 jobs, taking care of family members, those late penalties more often are reflecting that is what their life is that they have. They might not have the opportunity to get to the computer Monday by 11:59 p.m. to finish that paper, but they can do it by Friday or by Saturday, or maybe this week something disastrous happened. So the other thing is that so many instructors will say, well, I'm actually flexible if they just come and talk to me about it and let me know what's going on. But that is such a privilege for us to think that students have to share what's happening in their life for us to grant them the permission to extend those due dates. It's not respecting their lived experiences, and it's not respecting them basically as human beings. So by taking away those late penalties and making, again, our guiding principles a natural consequence, not the natural consequence where there's only a certain time I have in my hours I only have so many hours to grade. So you're going to have to submit it before the end of the semester because I have to submit grades by the end of the semester. But that's the natural consequence of that.
And the last one, which goes along with all the others, is extra credit. Also something that builds up a grade. I had my students last semester ask me about this. They were asking if there would be any extra credit assignments, and I said, you know what, the students who really need the extra credit, they usually are the ones that are not able to do it, whether it's time or something like that. And they looked at me and said, you're absolutely right. And I was like, oh, they get it, and they agree with me. And so, I mean, all these things, they just get in the way of accurate grades and their ways of judging our students on their life experience and everything else that that's going on in their lives. So, and I'm guilty of in the past of having done all these things. I had strict deadlines, I had strict penalties, I gave out participation points and extra credit for coming to events on campus. So my grades were wildly inaccurate. And removing all these things from the grade has been very freeing for me.
And this is one of the things where Julie and I have to be those annoying people on campus when something goes out and says, offer your students extra credit to submit this survey and offer your students extra credit for attending this event. And, we both have to push back and say, but do those align to the outcomes of the course? We want them to engage in our campus, but those students that can attend those, volleyball game or whatever it might be that's happening on campus, just like Julie said, they don't have those outside responsibilities. So they are increasing their chance of passing the class by points that aren't pointing to what they know in the class.
And I mean, particularly the not grading stuff is usually pretty hard for people to swallow. And so this quote from the book that we mentioned, Grading for Equity, is one that really sticks with us. If everything about me in class is judged and included in a grade, my grade says not what I've learned in the subject so far, but who I am. And it really just sends that message that I don't care about learning as an instructor. I care about compliance and doing the things I tell you to do. And so getting away from that is very freeing, and students respond very positively to this kind of perspective.
And it so clearly aligns with what many of us have gotten into education for, is supporting the learning process for our students. And if we continually say to our students, I'm here to support you learning. I want to do everything I can to help you learn the content, because we're so passionate about our discipline, and yet everything that we set up in our course gives the reverse statement. How confusing is that for our students, and really, quite frankly, how hypocritical of us. And when I say us, I'm pointing the mirror back at me, because all of these things, just like Julie mentioned, we did, and we're guilty of it to a very large degree. At least me. Julie's always been fantastic.
So you may be wondering at this point, well, what the heck do you assess? What is in the grade if we take all that other stuff out? And so this comes down to, what are the things that we want our students to get out of a particular class? What do we want them to be able to do? And if you're at all, if you find yourself nodding and wondering, well, how the heck do I implement something like this? This is where to start, is look at the core. Think about what your classes, how it fits into the curriculum of the broader program, and what are the things that you want your students to be able to do or understand by the time they're done with your course.
Yep. And you really want to start with that core, which is curriculum outline of record. I know there's some here that aren't from California community colleges. And so I'm a huge fan of backward design, and this is where it really applies as well. So we start with the outcomes. And for many of our courses, even when we say that, we've got these very big outcomes, and as they should be, because we're talking about this is the outcome for my whole semester worth of a class. And Julie and I are at a college that has 18 weeks. So 18 weeks later, I'm going to support you in learning these big outcomes. And so one of the first things that Julie and I started to do when we began this work is to take these outcomes and to break them down into these smaller skills. And really transparently, this was the hardest part of implementing this work, because there was so much that I had to think through and really challenge myself as the instructor of this course to think, okay, I got these big outcomes I thought I was accurately assessing, but what truly are the skills that align to each of these outcomes? And every semester, I feel like I'm fine tuning this, but this took me days and days to really get to a point that I was comfortable saying each of these skills align to these outcomes. And it's a different level of skills. I've got about 6 to 9 for each of my student learning outcomes. And I know, Julie, yours is a little bit different.
Yeah, I've got, for the entire course, I have, I'm doing this right now in a Calculus 2 class and starting to prep this for a statistics class. I have about 35 skills that I teach throughout the semester to my Calculus 2 students, but everyone like this maps to one of the SLOs for the course. And then with each one of these, you have a rubric and a lot of feedback that goes with it.
Yeah, the entire course is centered around feedback and communication around each of these skills. And you're creating this consistent, constant narrative with students that I am here to support you in mastering, becoming proficient, obtaining whatever vocabulary word you want to use, but it's focused on I am supporting you to get to those skills. And it's this consistent narrative and consistent feedback. If a student isn't obtaining that skill, mastering that skill, proficient in that skill, your feedback is constant about how can I support you to get to that next skill, and going back to those guiding principles. If they submit an assessment that's aligned to a skill that's not quite there, they get to submit it again and again and again, because our narrative in the course is I am here to support you to obtain, be proficient, master that skill. So as many times as you need to submit it to get there, I am going to support you in doing that.
And so
I'm not monitoring the chat very well. Julie, is there any questions? Is there any questions or comments
right now?
Okay.
Yeah, we'll keep going. And so next is an example of one of those rubrics from my class. And so what I like about this is I can clearly describe my expectations. A common question I would get as a math instructor from my students would be, well, what does showing your work mean? When they wouldn't get the grade they expected because there wasn't enough explanation there. And so here I'm able to clearly describe what I'm looking for, and they get this up front. They get it, they have this with them as they practice. I give them assignments that they can do that are not graded, but they can submit work and get feedback on it based off of this rubric to help prepare them for an exam. And they just have a clear delineation of what the expectations are up front.
Yeah, and Julie is really the master of creating these beautiful rubrics, and especially for, again, she's in math, and so though that discipline does create a much more clear delineation between those skills. I value rubrics. I'm not fantastic about making them as clear as they should be, and I constantly am working towards that. But I'm also in a field where it's not as clearly delineated what attachment looks like. And so this is where that feedback becomes very clearly, or very, it needs to be there with students. So if I'm assessing a skill, that they demonstrate what attachment looks like between a caregiver and an infant and toddler, then when they're submitting those assessments, I need to be very clear in my feedback if I don't see that they're demonstrating that, so that they know even better what my expectations are. But those rubrics really are very important so that you can be transparent in what the expectations are with your students.
And I would add, this was actually a huge time saver for me. The work going into writing these rubrics was extensive in the beginning, and I'm constantly tweaking them as I use them. Each semester, they get a little bit of a revamp based on how things went that semester, but the grading is quick. I can quickly look at a student's work and determine where they fall, and then I get to spend the bulk of my time on the feedback. Telling them, why they got the grade they got and where they can improve, what the mistakes were, if they made any, to help them get to that next level.
And one of the things that you can engage in, I'm a big fan of open pedagogy, and that's with co-constructing content with your students, is you can work with that, you can co-construct the rubric with your students. And this is a great way to use a discussion board, because it can also help break down language that you think is very clear to you, but is not clear to your students. So you can put the rubric in a discussion board and create an opportunity for students to engage in discussion of here's the rubric that I'm thinking about using, or that I'm going to use for this assessment. What are some words or verb or language that is not clear in here? How is another way that I can phrase what I'm asking to make it more clear? Or what should be the standard for mastering this content? And we can often forget about the experiences of our students, and some of them truly are very knowledgeable in the skills that we are looking at assessing. I know for me in early childhood, I quite frequently have students that are very engaged in the field that I'm looking at. And so co-constructing with them is another way to build rubrics that are meaningful and useful.
Now, if you're looking at this and saying, well, how do I convert this into an overall grade for the class? Well, for me, I do a straight average of all the skills are graded on a 4-point rubric like that one, and then I do a straight average. But then there becomes an issue with the traditional grade scale. Our 0 to 100% grade scale is very problematic for me. As you can see, just visually, it's very weighted towards failing. And there's a wide variation as well. It's very hard for me to sit and tell a student what the difference between a 69 and a 70 is. I can't describe each level on a 100-point scale like I can on a 4-point scale, as we did with the rubric. So these were all issues that made it very difficult to grade and would not work with a 4-point rubric. And it also just makes it when you have a grade scale that's so weighted towards failing, it is so hard for students to dig themselves out of a hole. If they miss a big assignment or they have a hard time in a particular unit, it can tank their whole grade. And depending on the way the grading system is designed, it could mean that there's no point in continuing. And with the changes that we made, there is never a point of no return. There's never a point of giving up, because there's always another opportunity to improve by learning the material and showing us you've learned it. And so there's no hole that you can't dig out of.
Yeah, and it really,
go ahead.
Yeah, and it really does fly in the face of us saying that we are here to support your learning, because as students practice those skills and get better at the skills, they're falling further and further into that huge gap of not passing. I mean, 70% of that scale or 60% of that scale is based off that will make a student fail, will put them into that big pit. And so as they're practicing and getting in better and better and better, those grades are constantly pulling them down and down and down, and they've got no opportunity to get out of that. And think about how frustrating that is. You want to get better, you want to learn the new skill, and yet you're looking at your percentage, and those earlier times when you're practicing that skill, it's pulled you so far down, you can't possibly pass the class. Or if you pass the class, you're barely going to pass the class. And that's not a natural consequence of working hard and getting better at a skill. So what is the answer then, Julie? Tell us.
So I use a 0 to 4 point scale now to match my rubric. A 0 to 4 point is definitely not the only way to do it, which I think is one of the things I love most about everything we're talking about today is it's not a one size fits all. You can pick and choose the things that work for you. I'm an all-in kind of person, so I dove into the deep end and implemented all these changes at once. And but it's not something that you can adjust it for you. Like I believe Amanda uses a 0 to 3 point scale. She doesn't like that exceeds standard, and so that's one of the things I really like about it. But I use a 0 to 4, much better weighted towards for passing. One of the things I tell my students after we've left that first day or gotten through that first week of class, I want my students to walk away feeling like this is something that they can be successful at. They can be successful in my class. And the things like the way we grade can really be a game changer for students, and having that level of confidence to know this is something I can do. And just looking at that grade scale and how it's weighted towards passing, that to me is a signal of, yeah, this is something that you can do. Go ahead, Nita.
Yeah, and it really clearly says to students, I am all about supporting you in obtaining those skills. And that's that consistent narrative that bleeds through our entire course. And just like Julie said, I like the 0 to 3. I have the rubric that is 0 to 4 because that 4 is, it exceeds, or whatever term you want to have on it. But it's basically saying, this skill so well that you can teach it. What I want to see is that you're on the 3. So each and every one of my assessments is only worth 3 points. And that is so unnerving to students sometimes because they're looking at that's just worth 3 points, but it's worth that skill. And so it is consistently saying that it's not about the points. I'm just putting the 3 points on there because that's letting me know you've obtained this skill. And if you have a 2, you can see visually you don't have this skill yet. You're not proficient in this skill. So keep working on it until you get that 3. So what does that look like? Since for us, we are at California Community College, so we do have to put a letter grade and a percentage and all those fun stuff. So what does that look like, Julie?
So we have a great breakdown. I think it's animated there.
Yeah, it's right there.
There we go.
I was trying to find my cursor.
So it starts at 3.5 to 4. So I said I do a straight average over all the scales. Oops, back up.
Sorry, I got it.
And so that's where my grade cutoffs are. And then if you, in the right column there, it converts it to 100% scale. And some people bulk at that. Well, 50% is passing. And even my students will kind of get a little scared about, well, is that going to transfer? If I'm not using a traditional percentage breakdown. And so this all goes back to the rubric. It's how I define each of those numbers, the 0, the 1, the 2, I design it to align with this. So for me, a 2 is you've got this. You haven't got all the details quite down, but you've got the main idea, so that I'm comfortable with passing. So it really goes back to how you define each of those levels on your rubric.
Yeah, and just like we said at the beginning, Julie and I are both at California Community Colleges, so we've got this great academic freedom where we can choose to make this as our grading scale. We talk to so many different instructors that look at this and go, oh, you're not doing a 0 to 90%? Like, why? Why do you do a 0 to 90%? And one of the things I really enjoyed about the Grading for Equity book is he looks at the history of where the 0 to 100 point scale came from. And the purpose of that scale is appalling. It really was to, the words escaped me now. It's appalling. Just read it and and you'll realize that the principles of equity that we are trying to implement in our classroom really do not align with a 0 to 100 point scale. So change it. We have this great freedom to be able to do that. And so a scale like this much more clearly aligns with saying, I want to support your learning and I'm going to do everything possible to do that. Yes, I still have to put a grade on it, unfortunately, but here is the way that I'm going to do it to say that your learning of these skills is what is most important to me. Any questions about this? Usually we get, oh, how can you do that? It's late on Friday. I get it.
Hi, the last piece of the puzzle that we
Oh,
said. Oh,
yep.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Margot, yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting because I actually do have some questions, but I don't know if this is a good time or you want to or not.
No,
But
no, absolutely.
okay.
Julie, yep. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're flexible.
Like I put in the chat, this sounds very familiar to something called ungrading. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but
Absolutely.
yeah. So and I get a lot of the principles of it. I completely agree with, giving more time and all of these things. I mean, there's a point where I think we all face this where, okay, it's late, but I've got to get it. If I've already graded the test or paper, whatever, or not even paper, but let's say the test, and you're trying to turn it in after all the grades have been put out. And I mean, come on, it's already done. Answers have been out, all of that. So there's an issue there. But I think the other thing, I don't know, there's a few questions I kind of have actually, is I like the participation points thing, and I actually do that, but you're saying, oh, we don't include that in the grade. You don't include that work that they're doing, that practice work, which I don't quite understand, because the way I do it is, oh, you did it. Here's a check mark, you did it. I don't go into, oh, it's, it's an A or B or C or D. But by not including that into the grade, I'm confused by why you wouldn't.
Well, and so and you bring up a really good point, because it's not, to me, the best way to do it, and Julie can talk about it from the math, is putting a check mark and saying, hey, you submitted that, but not putting a grade on it will allow students to see the connection. All right, you've engaged, you've participated, you've submitted the practice this many times, and your final grade, not final grade, but your grade on the test, the project, whatever it might be, is very low, and you haven't engaged in any of the practice, it allows for them to visually see that there might be a connection between those two. And so, and Julie, I'll let you talk about it in math, because I think the math example is really much clearer as far as that.
To me, this goes back to motivation. I don't like to use points anymore as motivation. It's not the reason that they're doing the assignment is to get the points. The reason they're doing the assignment is to learn the material. And so, like with homework, I mean, in math, we pretty typically grade with all these great homework systems we've got out here now, we grade every single problem, even though, yes, they get, multiple attempts at it and everything, but we're grading every problem. And so the motivation for the student becomes to get the grade. And I would get that question at the end of the semester, how many points do I need to pass the class? And so I really want to get more at the extrinsic, or get away from the extrinsic motivation and make it more intrinsic. Is they're here to learn. That's what I care about. And that's what the message I send to them is so that they will care about that. The grade will happen. They will pass the class. If they don't give up and they keep trying to learn, then they will pass. And so the motivation behind any assignment that I give them that is not graded is to learn the material and nothing else.
And we can get some pushback and say, well, this sounds like it's a lot less rigorous, but it actually is a lot more rigorous, because what we're saying is we are here to support your learning, and we're going to do everything possible to support that learning, but it's you who've got to put in that hard work. And I know you can put in that hard work, but it's up to you. I'm not going to use points as your stick to get there. This is all about you working hard, and I'm going to support you, but this is on you. And that's where it's that transparent conversation with students and giving them that opportunity to do that hard work and setting them up to do everything that they can. And if they choose not to participate, if they choose not to do the homework, then that's the choice that they make, and you're still going to support their learning. So if they don't do any of the homework, and say for Julie for math, they take the exam and they completely fail it, then that's the opportunity to have the conversation of, why don't you go back and practice those skills and then take the exam again?
Well, and it also gives students the opportunity to customize their learning. So, I mean, I create homework assignments for them to practice because I believe this will help them succeed. But maybe I have students who maybe they don't need to do every single problem that I put into that assignment. So they can decide how much they need to do before they feel comfortable with it. Or maybe they would rather just watch a video and practice that way than doing the homework. It gives them the freedom to decide how they're going to learn the material. And then the assessment is the only thing that is going to count towards a grade. So I'm not punishing my students for not learning in the way that I'm telling them to learn it.
Alpa, I'm sorry, I didn't ask how to pronounce your name the first
Oh,
time.
that's fine. Alpha's fine.
Okay.
So
Okay.
what I do is I have several formative assessments, right? So low stakes, and I do assign a point to there are 5 points, but there are lots of them, right? And so the way my grading breaks down is 60% of the total points for the course are formative points, right? And those are the low stakes points, and then the 40% are summative. So would you consider that to be an equitable grading system? Because the formative assessments are lots of small little assignments that they get feedback on. It's brainstorming in class, and then they write about it. So it's really accessible points. If we want to talk about points,
Would the students that are able to come regularly, though, right?
I'm sorry.
They would be accessible to the students that are able to come regularly. Students who maybe have to miss or something like that. It suddenly becomes harder for them.
Too. Yeah, because it's not participation points, right? It's brainstorming sessions in class where they do active learning, but the points are in the writing the answer up, because I just want them to have practice in communicating the information. So I don't know. I mean, I thought, does that kind of,
for me, I wouldn't grade those. I would still do them because they're valuable. They help students learn, but they're not the final assessment. They're not the final moment where the student shows me that they've learned it. So for me, I would not grade something like that. I would still do those assignments with my students, though. I didn't take out any assignments. That when I changed everything, I do all the same assignments I did before. I just only grade the ones that at the end of the learning experience, when they get that chance to show me, okay, now I know how to do this after all this practice and things that we've done together.
Right. Yeah, the only thing that is and Julie and I always want to be cautious that this is a journey, and so if something is working for you right now in how you support your students, then well, some things are just wrong, but if you're thinking intentionally about it. But for Julie and I, the only thing that's graded are things that directly align with a skill. And everything that directly aligns with a skill can be resubmitted within reason. So just like we talked about before, we work with English teachers a lot, and they've got so many essays. And so when we first started to roll this out on our campus, it's that they can't be turning it in the day before grades due. I don't have the time. I said, that is a natural consequence. You have to be transparent with your students that, most of the English instructors we're engaging with are women, but I'm a wife and a mom, and I only have 24 hours in a day. So I cannot stay up all night grading the essay so you can resubmit and resubmit and resubmit. There is a finite amount of hours that you have to do that. And that's where you have that very transparent conversation with the student is, I am here to support your learning, but I also only have 24 hours in a day. So here is the deadline, that my very true and clear deadline, because this is how many hours I have. So whether it's Monday before grades are due or whatever it might not, you need to think through what is a feasible amount of time, but it's a deadline that aligns with a real consequence. It's not a deadline that says, I like this day, but it's a deadline that says, I have these responsibilities, and my job, my grading is definitely a part of that. But because there literally is only 24 hours a day, I cannot magically make more hours. This is when this has to be due. Did that make sense? I usually use more words than I need to. Go ahead, Julie.
I limit it to 3 attempts, which, having a little bit of scarcity, it's the number of attempts makes each one valued by the student. But yeah, so I have 3 attempts at anything, and I've never had a student that either had enough time to need more attempts to that, or that didn't master it in that amount of time.
Yeah, and we also need to understand that depending on the demographics of students that we're working with in our discipline, and if we're really being self-reflective, little points might be helpful to scaffold those skills, but we really need to take a look at it and see, okay, is this really something that's going to damage them? Is it consistent with the narrative? But but I do want to acknowledge that for some, they feel like this is a very important thing to help scaffold them to get to this next level of just assigning points to the skills. And I understand that. Those guiding principles that we were talking about, though, that should really be what you're thinking about. Okay, can a student still practice the skills without digging themselves in a hole that they can't recover from and pass the class? I don't want to make anybody feel bad if they're really trying to work hard on that. That's what I'm trying to. Go ahead, Margot.
I don't want to monopolize the time here, but these are some really good questions. To that point, and I'm one of those English teachers. So, I mean, we have the essays and all that. So there comes a point where it's like, okay, but I find that students generally, they're not trying to rewrite a million papers either. So, you know, you don't really fall into that. Oh, I'm going to rewrite it 4 times. But anyway, the point I want to make, though, is when we're talking about, oh, you know, this whole thing about the real world. I think we do as instructors, though part of our job is to prepare them for other classes and for the consequences of the real world. Because if you have a job and you go and, you know, is your boss, your director, your whatever going to say, oh, turn it in when you're ready. Oh, yeah, take another 3 months if that's what you need. So, you know, I'm kind of, I understand the point, but also if I'm giving that much leeway and that much, I don't know, we got to get some leeway for sure. But if there's not some of those hard dates, some of that interaction, that back and forth where, yeah, you need to contact me if something's going on. And yeah, I might give you another 2 weeks, sure, because it's no sweat off my back, but I've at least got to hear from you. So I'm always a little hesitant with some of the ungrading, because I'm not sure we're preparing students to move on to that next class where that professor is like, hey, it's due Friday, period. Or they go to that job, or they go to that whatever it is, and they're like, well, Miss Vance said I could do whatever. So that is a question for me. The last thing I'd say, though, is I think in order to change for the most equity, and this is maybe pie in the sky, I think a lot of these classes ought to just flat be, you know, pass, fail, or, you know, comprehension, non-comprehension, and that's it. I think that all this ABCD list, for Comp 1, you either got it or you don't. But that's another conversation, because if we were on that model, I think some of this would be taken care of. Okay, that's it.
Well, and you can design the rubric to fit your needs as well. And we're not fans of ungrading. I will say, Amanda can go on for a while about what she doesn't like about that. I'm not a fan myself of ungrading.
Yeah, we are a big pass fail, because it does the skill. But I do want to address the real world one, and this is one that will sometimes make me cry, so I apologize, because I'm also incredibly sleep deprived right now. But like I said, Julie and I have said, we work in a very rural part of Central California, and when I teach child development, and so one of the classes that I teach is called Child, Family, Community, and children, excuse me. My students had to write what's a socialization paper. And so when I first started teaching, I come from a very insulated life. And I did not live the real world. When my students wrote these papers, I realized their life is the real world. And I say this very, very loving, Margot, so I don't want you think I'm attacking, but what my students had to live through was more of the real world than most of my colleagues have ever had to experience in their life. Their real world was, okay, how am I going to take $10, feed my family? How am I going to escape the gun violence that's outside? And so I worried less when I thought about that, about deadlines such as submitting work on time, because I know that they had the skills to live in the real world. And so I really felt like part of my responsibility was helping them see those amazing skills that you have to survive in the real world. You can make them work in an academic environment by applying them in certain ways. So when I changed in my head what I thought of what the real world was, it really helped me to support my students to say, this is the world of academia. You have got real world skills that I will never even know and have to experience. But if this is what you want to do for your college career, here's how you can take those skills that you are brilliant at and help them work for you to be successful in academia. Does that answer that part of the question at least?
If I'm being honest, not quite. Sorry.
No, that's fine. And I'm trying to be succinct, knowing that, oh my goodness, we've got only
right.
only
I
10
know.
minutes.
And I really don't want to bombard that because I'm in rural Midwest. So I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's rural Midwest and there's issues and violence and all of these things. I mean, so I'm with you. I'm with you there. It's just that sometimes I think we don't always give our students the security and the opportunity to do what they need to do. Like they can do it. I tell them all the time, you can do this. There's no reason you can't. So me setting a deadline and then talking to you about it and we can move the deadline, but you can handle a deadline. I mean, you can handle that. So sometimes I think we don't give students enough credit for getting the thing done and moving along and having the consequences. So I hear what you're saying completely, and it's a fine line trying to balance those things. But I just don't want us to just go, well, their lives are so hard, so I'm going to really ease up on this.
Absolutely not.
I push back on that a little bit. Maybe that's not what you're saying. I don't want to say, say that that's what you're saying, but it's just.
And I'll let Julie chime in because she's had a lot of great conversations about this.
And I would just say that I have a schedule. I have deadlines, but those deadlines, nothing shuts down after that deadline. Students can still go in and do it. And I will get the majority of my students will do it on that day, not the day before, even though they could have, not the day after, they'll do it on that day. And then I'll get some that's trickle in after that. And then about a week after that deadline is when they start hearing from me. So to me, I replace the penalty of points being removed with the penalty of you have to talk to me about it now. I'm going to be checking in with you now and saying, hey, is there anything I can do to help to make sure that you stay on with this and stuff? So I mean, for most students, like they just need a little wiggle room. And that's what this flexibility they allows for them. They don't have to ask me. They don't have to justify why they need more time and me having to make some kind of judgment. It's really just giving them that little wiggle room to work it into their lives. And then the ones that are really just struggle with time management, well, those are the ones that I reach out to, and they get a little bit more hands-on with me about, what can I do to help you? Let's get you on a schedule. And this is honestly something I still struggle with students. I still have students that struggle with this, even when I'm communicating with them. And I'm always looking for new ways of helping them learn those time management skills to keep them on task. But to me, that's really what this is about for students, just giving them that little bit of flexibility to work this into their lives.
And like we said in the chat, none of it means lessening standards. For me, I was so much more tempted to say, yeah, you've had a hard life. That's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and let you pass. But now I'm much more accountable because I have these skills and I'm looking at it going, oh, I haven't seen these skills. So while I know it has been so hard for you and I acknowledge that, I don't see that you have these skills, so you can't pass the class. And so, and it's different for every teacher, but I was so definitely one of those that was just like, yeah, okay, you can get an A because it's rough. And so now I know that when my students pass, they're passed based on the rigor of those skills. So I'm holding a much higher standard for them. And the end of the semester comes and we have 72 hours between the last day of the semester and to submit our grades. So we literally have no wiggle room of the semester's done and our grades are in. And so that's what it is. And if you don't have everything in, you don't pass the class. And I feel comfortable with that because I'm not sending students out into the world for child development without knowing these skills. I'm not sending them to the next higher class with my stamp of approval if they don't know the skills. So I'm so much more comfortable and confident in what the students know now.
Amanda, you want to skip through to a couple of slides forward?
Probably. Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure we kind of went over and kind of summed up those benefits. And I have some quotes here from some students as well, and their reaction, just things that I hear from them as doing this. So for me, learning is supported, not point counting. That was always a big pet peeve of mine, that students were really so focused on points, and learning was secondary to all that. It's very motivating to students. Having retakes, having additional opportunities to show that they've learned the material is extremely motivating. Teaching is personalized for students. They do the things that help them master the material, not what I tell them to do. And the grades are way more accurate. They reflect what my students actually learned and not the amount of work that they did for me. And my relationships with my students are better. I am not sitting here arguing over compliance and points. They know now that I'm on their side. I had to revamp everything, the wording of everything, the syllabus, I completely redesigned to go with this. And it's just made it so much more enjoyable to be a teacher and interact with my students than it ever was when I was enforcing a bunch of rules. And just some quotes from students, things that I picked out. I've been doing this for about 2 years. So I've heard things like, I really feel like our teacher really wants us to pass this class. We're graded based on understanding the material. It keeps us going instead of completely giving up when we don't do good on a certain thing. This course is an extremely rewarding course. The satisfaction of finally understanding a concept is extremely exciting and fun.
And I put our emails in the chat. We love having these conversations. And Margot, I'm so happy that you were willing to chime in and ask those hard questions. We do. We absolutely love it. It challenges us to think through also our practices, because we don't want to do things that aren't intentional and aren't beneficial to our students as well. So we always tell our colleagues, bring on all those hard questions. And one of my favorite quotes is, I might not agree with what you say, but it challenged me to think differently. And so I always love it. So I want to thank you for being brave enough to do that, because it can be hard to do sometimes. And I think you're welcome. So we have 3 more minutes. Julie and I have our email in the chat. Feel free to hit either of us up, or if anybody else has any questions or any challenges or any concerns. Absolutely love to have a conversation.